The wedding of my grandson seemed perfect, until my youngest son whispered, "We have to leave, right now." When I asked him why, he just replied, "I'll explain it to you in the car." During the silence on the drive back home, he finally said, "Did you notice anything different about my sister-in-law?" The true purpose of that wedding was— But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our revenge stories reach. I sat under the fuchsia and violet bougainvillea at the Los Robles Ranch outside of Dallas, Texas, my heart filled with complete happiness. At this age, there is nothing more valuable than being here, on the land of my ancestors, watching the new generations of the family flourish. The guests were dancing lively, the laughter, the toasts, and the clinking of glasses created a symphony of joy. This old heart of mine also felt warmed by that atmosphere. I smiled, my eyes full of tenderness, following my grandson, David. The young man, now a handsome adult, looked somewhat nervous as he adjusted the white flower on the lapel of his tuxedo for his new wife. She looked at him with bright eyes, full of happiness. That moment was beautiful, as perfect as a painting. Beside me was Robert, my oldest son. Although he had been confined to a wheelchair for years, his eyes shone with infinite pride at seeing his son all grown up. And there was Candace, Robert's wife, my eldest daughter-in-law. She walked among the tables, elegantly holding a glass of wine, greeting every guest with a kind smile. Candace met my gaze. She smiled and nodded at me with respect. I felt fortunate that Robert had such a dedicated and caring wife. In the heat of the afternoon, a young waiter brought me a glass of cold and refreshing mint lemonade, with green slices and leaves floating on the clear ice. I was about to bring the glass to my lips when Candace approached. She gently took the glass from my hands. "Mum, let me change your glass," she said in a voice as sweet as honey. "This one barely has any ice left. It's not as good anymore. Please wait just a moment." She signaled the waiter to take the glass away, and shortly after, an identical one, full of ice and fresh mint, was placed in front of me. I smiled, thinking my daughter-in-law was truly thoughtful and detail-oriented, that she didn't let even the smallest thing go unnoticed. I suspected nothing. The party was at its peak. The master of ceremonies enthusiastically announced that the fireworks to celebrate the newlyweds were about to begin. Everyone exclaimed with excitement, looking toward the field where the pyrotechnics were already set up. At that instant, I saw my youngest son, Thomas, walking quickly toward our table. Something was wrong. His face did not fit the joy that reigned in the place. He wasn't smiling. His brow was furrowed, his eyes fixed forward, tense. He didn't greet anyone, not even close relatives. He went directly behind me, where Robert was. Thomas leaned down, placing a hand on my shoulder. I felt his hand trembling and icy despite the heat. He leaned close to my ear and whispered in a rushed, utterly contained voice, "Mum, don't ask anything. Listen to me. We have to leave here, right now." I froze, my heart skipped a beat. All the noise, the music, the laughter, vanished suddenly. I turned to look at him, wanting to ask, but the terrified expression in Thomas's eyes stopped me. He shook his head slowly, pleading with me not to say anything. Robert, noticing something strange, asked, "What's wrong, Thomas?" But Thomas completely ignored him. His gaze was locked on me, as if his life depended on what I decided to do at that moment. My mother's instinct screamed that something very serious was happening. I didn't know what it was, but the fear in my youngest son's eyes was real. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I turned to Robert and gently patted his hand. "I'm a little dizzy," I said. I think it was the wine. Mum, go inside the house to rest for a while and come right back out. In the distance, through the gaps between the guests, I saw Candace narrowing her eyes, looking toward us. Her perfect smile tensed slightly when she saw Thomas and me get up at the same time. Thomas and I quickly made our way through the crowd, who were excitedly awaiting the start of the fireworks. The music and laughter continued to echo behind us, creating a strange contrast with the silence and tension that enveloped us. Upon reaching the parking lot, which was emptier and darker, I saw that Thomas's car was already running. Lucy, his wife, was sitting in the passenger seat, her face as pale as a sheet of paper. In the back seat, my grandson Matthew was sleeping soundly, his little head resting against the window, completely oblivious to the chaos that was beginning to unfold. Thomas opened the back door for me. His gesture was no longer an invitation, but almost a gentle shove to get me into the car quickly. The door slammed shut with a dry sound. He sat hastily behind the wheel and stepped on the gas. The car shot out of the ranch gate, the tires squealing on the gravel road, leaving behind all the lights, the music, and the splendor of the party. The car sped along the dark path, illuminated only by the headlights cutting through the night. I looked in the rear-view mirror. The Los Robles Ranch, my home, was now no more than a bright dot lost in the distance. The silence inside the car was so dense that I could hear my own heart beating in my chest. I couldn't stand it anymore. Thomas, what is happening? Why do we have to— Thomas interrupted me, his eyes fixed on the road, although I saw him glance briefly in the mirror, as if he feared someone was following us. He took a deep breath to calm himself and answered me with a question. His voice turned grave, with a disturbing tone I had never heard from him before. Mum, didn't you notice anything strange about Candace today? Thomas's question was like a key entering an old lock, turning with a screech, and suddenly opening a door that I had tried to seal for a long time. Inside the narrow, suffocating car, speeding through the darkness, my mind began to wander back to a few months ago, to a Sunday morning so peaceful it hurt to remember it. A morning that I now understand was only a thin layer hiding the cracks that were already silently spreading. That day I was sitting on the porch, where the morning sunbeams, golden like honey, danced on the brick floor. The rhythmic sound of knitting needles accompanied the scent of damp earth after a night of dew and the soft perfume of the garden roses. I was knitting a sky-blue sweater for Matthew, my little grandson. Robert was reading the newspaper in his usual wheelchair. Occasionally he would look up and smile as he watched Matthew running and shouting with joy while playing tag with Lucky, our faithful sheepdog, on the lawn. That scene, in that moment, was the definition of happiness for me. Then Candace came out of the kitchen with a wooden tray in her hands, chamomile tea, and some freshly baked, still steaming cookies. She was always like that, attentive and sweet. She placed a steaming cup next to me and said in a soft voice, "Mum, drink this, it will do you good. Don't knit so much, it will tire your eyes." Then she turned to Robert, carefully broke off a piece of cookie, and tenderly brought it to his mouth. Seeing crumbs at the corner of Robert's lips, she smiled and wiped them with a handkerchief with a gesture full of affection, as if caring for a child. That image filled me with warmth and gratitude. In silence, I thanked God for giving my son, so battered by life, such a dedicated wife, someone capable of sustaining that large ranch alongside him. Just then, one of the ranch hands came running from the fields, agitated, and informed Candace that the fence of the western paddock had been knocked down by a group of cattle. Robert, with the experience of someone born and raised on this land, commented, "You should send them to reinforce it with oak posts. It will be firmer. It will resist the rain and the sun." Candace interrupted her husband. but in such a gentle way that no one could perceive it as disrespect. "Don't worry," she said, her hand still resting on Robert's shoulder. "I already sent them to put up steel posts last week. They are more durable and install faster. You just rest. I'll take care of everything." Then she turned to the workers, with a firm voice full of authority, ordering them to finish the job that same day. Robert said nothing more, only lowered his head in silence, looking at the newspaper open on his lap. At that moment, I only saw her as a capable and quick woman, a modern woman able to handle everything. I didn't realize that in Robert's silent inclination, there was also a deep helplessness. That same afternoon, Thomas and Lucy returned from the city to visit us. It had been a long time since the family had shared such a complete dinner. Amidst the joyful atmosphere, I began to talk about my plans for the future. "My children," I said, serving each of them a piece of roast turkey. "When Mom goes to be with the Lord, the Los Robles Ranch will be managed by Robert and Thomas together. The land of our ancestors must be cared for by the descendants." Thomas nodded immediately. "Yes, Mum. Even though I live in the city, I will still have responsibility to the family. Robert will take care of the field, and I will handle the books and the business." I saw that Candace, who was serving food to David at that moment, stopped her hand for a split second, almost imperceptibly. But I noticed it. Then she smiled, with that radiant smile of hers. "Mom always worries too much," she said sweetly. "Robert and David were born here. They grew up here. This ranch is their life." On the other hand, Thomas already has his career in the city, his own life. It wouldn't be fair to make him come back to be a rancher. It would make him suffer. Lucy, my youngest daughter-in-law, an intelligent and straightforward woman, intervened. "He doesn't necessarily have to be a rancher, sister-in-law. As Thomas said, he can take care of the commercial side, the books, finding markets for the ranch's products." "Wouldn't that be better?" The atmosphere at the table became a little tense. Candace did not respond. She only served a large piece of meat onto David's plate, with a look that was hard to read. The dinner ended with a certain discomfort. A few weeks after that meal, Mr. Johnson, a long-time worker, very loyal to my late husband, came to see me in secret. He looked worried. He told me that Candace had sold the ranch's most valuable Percheron horse, Star, a treasure that my husband had brought with great effort, on her own. The woman did it without consulting anyone, not even Robert. I felt my blood boil. I called Candace to ask for an explanation. She didn't deny it. On the contrary, she seemed excited. She explained that Star was already old and sick, and that she had used the money from the sale to install an automatic irrigation system across the entire cornfield. With enthusiasm, she led me by the hand to show me the new pipes gleaming in the sun. "I wanted to surprise Mum," she said with shining eyes. "With this system, the ranch will produce much more, and the workers will have less effort. See, I did the right thing." The way she turned a questionable decision into a supposed gift, a show of devotion to the family, made all my words of reproach get stuck in my throat. I could only nod, but in my heart, a vague uneasiness began to grow that I couldn't explain. Sitting in the strongly vibrating car, the memories of the breeding horse and the irrigation system flashed in my mind like lightning. A chilling truth ran down my spine. I realized that this had not been a gift. It was an assertion of power, a message that the entire legacy of the past could be sold to feed her ambition. She was gradually erasing all traces of my family and replacing them with her own dominion. I felt a shiver and looked at Thomas. Now I understood. My son's question had not been a simple suspicion. It was a warning I should have recognized a long time ago. My thoughts returned to the moment the breeding horse was sold, leading me to an afternoon of torrential rain about 2 months before the wedding. The rain beat hard against the glass of the large window of the office, making the outside landscape grey and sombre, just like my mood at that moment. Mr. Miller, the old accountant who had worked for my family for more than 40 years, since my father-in-law was young, came to see me. His face, lined with the wrinkles of time and dedication, now reflected an impossible sadness to hide. With trembling hands, he placed a carefully handwritten letter of resignation on my oak desk. "Ma'am," he said, his voice choked, "I would like to request my retirement." I felt a knot in my chest. "Why, Mr. Miller? You have been with the Robles family all your life. Has something bad happened?" He lowered his gaze, avoiding my eyes. "Miss Candace asked me to hand over all the accounting books and documents to a cousin of hers who has come from the city. She says the ranch needs to modernize its financial system, that younger, more agile people are needed." I tried to convince him to stay. I promised to talk to Candace. But he only shook his head, a denial full of resignation. "No, ma'am. She is the new owner now. The power is in her hands. I am just an old-fashioned man. I no longer have a place here." The day Mr. Miller left, the rain was still pouring down. Seeing his stooped figure disappear into the white curtain of the downpour, I felt a part of the ranch's soul leave with him. Candace had replaced my people with hers, subtly but relentlessly. Not long after, during a weekend visit from Thomas's family, the invisible cracks began to show more clearly. We were sitting on the porch, enjoying the fresh air after the rain. Matthew ran toward his father, tugging on his sleeve, excited to tell him about the newborn colt in the stable. "Dad, he's beautiful. When I grow up, I want to learn to ride and take care of the ranch like Uncle Robert used to." Candace, who was sitting nearby, smiled as she heard him, a smile that now, remembering it, seems distant. She stroked Matthew's head. "What a good boy. But working on the ranch is very hard. It's not for city people like you. You study hard so that one day you can be a doctor or an engineer, like your parents. The future will be much better for you." And then, as if to further emphasize her words, she turned to David, who was cleaning the saddle in a corner of the patio, and said loudly, loud enough for all of us to hear, "And what's here? Let David manage it. He has the blood of this land. He cannot be separated from it." A phrase that seemed harmless, but was like an invisible knife slash, drawing a cruel and clear border between my two grandsons. One belonged to the city, to the future. The other was tied to this land. Thomas didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tense, the veins standing out on his neck. Lucy hurriedly pulled Matthew toward her chest, quickly changing the subject to dissipate the tension. But the seed of division had already been planted, right before my eyes. The peak of my suspicions came one night when I went down to the wine cellar to look for an old bottle to treat an important family guest. Our cellar had a secret passage that connected to the back warehouse, a design from my husband's grandfather's time to facilitate transport. As I approached the heavy wooden door separating the two areas, I heard voices coming from the warehouse. I immediately recognized Candace's voice and that of the new foreman she had hired to replace the previous one. My curious instinct awoke. I hid behind the door, pressed my ear to the crack, and tried to listen. The foreman asked in a subservient tone, "Ma'am, young Thomas sometimes comes by here. Do you know if he's involved in ranch business? I get the impression he's interested." I heard Candace's sarcastic laugh, a cold, razor-sharp laugh, a laugh I had never heard from her before. Then her voice turned hard, every word coming out clear and cruel, stabbing directly into my chest. "Remember this well. This ranch, just like a kingdom, only needs one heir. The others are a burden that must be eliminated. My heart stopped. My whole body began to tremble. I had to lean against the icy stone wall of the cellar to keep from falling. A burden? My son? Yes, yes, I understand, ma'am. But Candace didn't stop. And the older lady too. She continued, with a voice full of power and a contempt she made no attempt to hide. She's old now, always talking about feelings, but in reality, she's senile. From now on, I decide everything here. Don't waste your time talking to her. I silently backed away into the shadows, trembling, and returned to my room. I didn't take the bottle of wine. The bitterness in my throat surpassed that of any wine. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Candace's words kept repeating in my mind. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and dialed Thomas's number. After a few rings, my son answered. I heard his cheerful voice. "Mum, why are you calling at this hour?" "I'm playing hide and seek with Matthew. Is something wrong?" Matthew's crystalline laugh rang in the receiver, pure and carefree. Hearing it, I got a knot in my throat. I wanted to tell him everything, warn him. But how could I destroy that peace? How could I tell him that his sister-in-law, whom he respected so much, saw him as a burden to be eliminated? In the end, all I managed to say, with a broken voice, was, "No, nothing's wrong, son. I just wanted to hear your voices. When you have time, come visit me." I hung up before Thomas noticed the tremor in my voice. I chose silence, trying to convince myself that maybe I had misheard, that Candace had only spoken without thinking. And now, in this car speeding wildly through the night, I know that silence was deadly. My silence fed the evil, gave it time to grow, until today it became a terrifying conspiracy. The screech of the tires on the gravel cut through my flow of guilty thoughts. Thomas stopped the car on a lonely road, under the thick shadow of an old oak tree. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence enveloped us, more disturbing than the roar of the engine. Only our agitated breathing and the distant singing of insects could be heard. In the bluish light emanating from the dashboard, I saw Thomas's face hardened, filled with worry and fury. He turned toward me. Lucy also turned, reaching for my hand. Hers was cold and sweaty. "Mom!" Thomas began, his voice trembling but contained so as not to wake Matthew. "A little while ago, just before the master of ceremonies announced the fireworks, I wanted to give David a surprise. I went behind the stage to find the leader of the band to ask him to play an old romantic song that David loves. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The shortcut there goes through the grassy area where they set up the fireworks bases. It was quite dark. There weren't many lights. I accidentally ran into Candace there, talking to a man dressed in the uniform of the fireworks technical team. My instinct told me something wasn't right, so I hid behind a large rhododendron bush. The distance was quite great, so I couldn't clearly hear what they were saying, but I could see their actions very, very well. Thomas paused for a second, as if to gather the courage to continue the story. Candace raised her hand and made a sharp gesture, a diagonal line from the sky downwards, her hand pointing directly toward the white tent, where our family's head table was seated. "It wasn't a normal gesture. It was full of intent, Mum." The technician nodded several times, with an expression that was both frightened and greedy. Immediately after, Candace tucked a very thick envelope into his hand and turned around hastily, as if afraid someone would see her. I saw the guy partially open the envelope, his eyes lit up, and he quickly put it in his pocket. I felt like someone was squeezing my chest. I tried to breathe, but the air seemed to thicken. Lucy continued my son's words, her voice so tense it almost broke into sobs. "And about the banquet table, Mum? In the afternoon, when I arrived early to help, I saw that they were setting up the head table right on the main house porch, under the cover, very safe and elegant. I even commented that the decoration was very beautiful. But about an hour before the party started, it was Candace herself who asked the service team to move our whole family's table outside, right next to the lawn. It seemed strange to me, and I asked why they were moving it there. The ground was still somewhat damp from last night's rain, and it would be uncomfortable for the guests to move around. Do you know how she answered me? Lucy looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. She smiled and said, "Sitting there will have the best view to watch the fireworks, Lucy. The photos won't be affected by the porch. The pictures will come out perfect. Perfect." At the time it seemed strange, but I didn't think beyond that. I thought it was just her being a perfectionist about her son's big day. A chill began to run through every cell of my body. The loose pieces started to fit together. All of Candace's meticulousness, all her obsession with perfection, appeared in another light, a demonic light. Just then, a rustle came from the back seat. Matthew had woken up without us noticing. The boy rubbed his eyes and peeked his little head between the two front seats with a sleepy but clear voice. "Grandma." We were startled and looked back. "A while ago I was playing hide-and-seek with the others," the boy whispered. "I hid under the long table where they put the drinks. I hid very well. Nobody saw me." He yawned and continued telling his story. "I heard Mrs. Candace talking to the waiter who brought the lemonade for you. I heard it very clearly. She said, 'Remember, Mrs. Agnes's glass has to be the one with a little green mark on the bottom. Don't get it confused with any other glass.'" The waiter asked, "Ma'am, why does it have to be that glass?" Candace didn't say anything. She just gave him a terrifying look that scared him so much he didn't dare ask more. He just said yes and left. The lemonade glass. The glass that Candace changed for me. The three of us fell into an absolute silence. The silence this time was 1,000 times worse. The air in the car seemed to have run out. Everything was revealed with a cruel sharpness, cutting like a freshly sharpened blade, moving the entire family's table to a dangerous location, right in the line of fire of the fireworks battery, bribing the technician to intentionally adjust the firing direction of a faulty rocket, and to ensure it even more, preparing a glass of poisoned water, a carefully marked glass, to guarantee it reached the hands of the correct victim. That wasn't one plan, it was 3 cruel interlocking backup plans. Even if one plan failed, there was always another. Even if I managed to survive the explosion, I wouldn't escape the attentive mint lemonade glass. The final goal was only one. I had to die. To die on my grandson's happiest day, in front of hundreds of people, and for my death to be perfectly disguised as a tragic accident. I felt a shiver run down my back, a cold that chilled me to the bone, impossible to relieve with any coat. I hugged my chest, which hurt sharply. Candace, the daughter-in-law I once loved, wanted to kill me. Just then, from the ranch in the distance, a dull, heavy thump was heard. That sound cut through the night, hitting directly in our ears. Thomas shouted, his voice broken by terror. They started firing. We all turned in unison toward the horizon, where a spark of light in the cottonwoods flickered weakly. A trail of fire rose, tearing the darkness. The first light ascended, but it did not shoot straight into the sky to burst into a brilliant flower as it should have. No, it flew low, following a terrifying low curve, like a fiery arrow launched from an ancient war machine, pointing directly at a predetermined target. I felt my heart drop into an abyss. Thomas screamed and started the engine. "We have to go further away," he muttered through clenched teeth, his hands gripping the steering wheel. But it was useless. None of us could look away from the terrifying spectacle happening behind us. We were hypnotized by the nightmare we had just escaped. After the first light, 3 or 4 more shot up at the same time. They no longer followed any order. They scattered like a bouquet of deadly flowers, flying crazily toward the ranch. Some exploded prematurely, letting out a dreadful sizzle in the air. Others fell directly, bringing death and destruction with them. I heard Matthew crying inconsolably, a cry that broke my soul. Lucy hugged him tightly, burying his face in her chest so he wouldn't see any more. And then, a deafening explosion erupted, overshadowing all other sounds. It was unlike any firework I had ever heard in my life. It was a grave, powerful rumble that made our car vibrate, and the earth tremble beneath us. Right in the spot of the white tent where we had been sitting, where the head table was, an immense orange and red blaze leaped up in a blink. It devoured everything. The canvas, that harmless material, caught fire immediately. The flames spread with an unnatural speed, as if someone had doused every fibre with fuel. I could imagine the silk ribbons, the paper flower arrangements that I myself had chosen, now becoming food for the fire advancing mercilessly. From that distance, through the quiet night, we could still hear the desperate and chaotic screams of hundreds of people. The cheerful band music had long since stopped, replaced by a symphony of horror. Screams, sobs, falling objects, stumbling footsteps seeking escape. A column of black smoke, thick as tar, rose, covering the stars. The acrid smell of burnt canvas, of charred food for a second time, and perhaps something even more terrible, reached us, entering our noses and lungs, making me nauseous. I covered my mouth, trying to stifle a scream, but I couldn't utter a word. My whole body was paralyzed. The image of Robert, motionless in his wheelchair in front of the head table, of David and the bride holding hands happily, all succeeded each other in my mind, one after another. If Thomas hadn't arrived in time, if we hadn't left there, I dare not think further. That idea is even more terrifying than the fire in front of us. Bang! Thomas's hand slammed violently against the steering wheel, and the car trembled. He grit his teeth in rage, his eyes bloodshot, veined, fixed on the flames through the rear-view mirror. "That damn witch!" he cried through clenched teeth, a curse filled with hatred and pain. Lucy, one arm still hugging Matthew, who was sobbing, took out her phone with her other trembling hand. She stammered, her lips blue with fear. "Oh, we have to call the fire department. An ambulance!" Her hand was shaking so much that she misdialed several times before managing to call the emergency number. When the call connected, all she could shout into the phone was, "Fire! A huge fire at Los Robles Ranch! Quickly! There are a lot of people!" I could only cling tightly to the seat, my chest constricted, as if an iron hand were strangling me. All prayers seemed useless in the face of that scene. I could only repeat in my head, over and over like a desperate plea. "My God, please save them. Save the innocent." In the distance, on the main road, I began to see the flashing red and blue lights of fire trucks and police cars. Sirens broke the night and approached closer and closer, racing toward my ranch. Thomas turned around and drove in the opposite direction, heading further into the darkness, away from the place where the light of sin reigned. He spoke with a hoarse voice, broken by shouting and rage. "We can't go back there now. The police will close the area, and most importantly, she won't leave us alone if she knows we escaped." I looked back one last time at Los Robles, the ranch of my ancestors, the place that had seen so many generations born, grow, love, and die, the one that held so much joy and sorrow, was now engulfed in a sea of fire. The wild flames danced in the night sky, illuminating the trees and creating a scene as ghostly as it was tragic. It was not the light of a celebration. It was the light of sin, of infinite greed, and of limitless malice. And I knew one thing for certain: that demonic light would never go out. It would burn forever in my mind, haunting me for the rest of my days. That night we stayed in a small, dusty, nameless motel on the side of the road in the neighboring town, but safe enough to hide us from the world. None of us managed to sleep for a minute. The image of the infernal flames of Los Robles appeared every time I closed my eyes. Matthew would occasionally tremble and mumble in his sleep. Lucy spent the night awake, trying to calm him. And Thomas, he just stood silently by the window, staring into the empty darkness, his jaw clenched. At dawn, when the first rays of sun filtered through the crack in the door, Thomas went out for a drive. He said he needed to find out what had happened. An hour later, he returned. His face was haggard, exhausted from the sleepless night, but his eyes no longer showed the absolute panic of before. In its place was a slight relief. He sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand. "Mum, I just went to the town hospital and found out something." He took a deep breath. "There were no deaths. God protected us. Everyone managed to escape in time." I held my breath. "Robert only has minor burns on his hands from trying to push his wheelchair out of the fire. David and the bride are completely safe. Some guests were injured from the shoving, but nothing serious." Hearing that, the strength that had held me up all night suddenly vanished. I cried, but this time they were not tears of fear or anger, but tears of infinite relief. God had shown mercy. The plan of that cursed woman, though cruel, was not completely fulfilled. After calming down, we decided we had to go back. Fleeing was not the solution. We had to return and face it. Look the person who committed the crime in the eye. The car passed through the familiar iron gate of Los Robles. A devastating scene appeared before us. The lawn, once a green carpet, was now just black, burnt ground. The elegant white banquet tent only retained its metal framework, twisted and melted by the heat, like the skeleton of a prehistoric monster. The air was saturated with the pungent smell of burnt plastic and fabric, a stench that clung to clothing, hair, to every breath. Some police officers were still moving around the taped-off area, taking measurements and notes. And there was Candace, on the porch, talking to an officer. She looked miserable. Her hair, always carefully styled, was messy. The evening gown from the night before had been replaced by simple clothes. Her face was pale and tired, her eyes swollen and red, as if she had cried all night. She was acting, perfectly playing the role of a grieving victim. Seeing our car, she hastily ended the conversation, thanked the officer, and ran toward us, with an expression of anguish. As soon as I got out of the car, Candace threw herself at me and hugged me. "Mom, what a joy! Thank God, are you okay?" Her voice trembled, her shoulders shaking with sobs in my arms. "I looked for you everywhere last night. I thought something horrible had happened to you. I was terrified, Mom." I stood motionless, like a stone statue, unable to return the false embrace. I felt my body bristling, rejecting her every touch. Behind me, Thomas and Lucy were silent, but I could feel their icy stares fixed on Candace. Noticing my lack of response, she let go of me. She took my hands and looked at me with tearful eyes full of apparent concern. "Where were you all night, Mum? Do you know how terrible everything was here? It's a good thing you weren't here." "It was a blessing for the family." I withdrew my hands and replied in a dry, distant voice. I was tired, so Thomas took me to rest. Candace nodded quickly, pretending to believe it without hesitation. Yes, of course. How lucky. It's good that you took her, Thomas. She turned to my son, with a tone full of gratitude. The police say it was a technical failure. A faulty rocket caused the fire. The fireworks company has already assumed all responsibility. Incredible, right? They almost ruined the happiest day of the family. They almost caused a tragedy. She spoke non-stop, leaving no space for anyone, weaving a perfect narrative about a tragic accident, where she was the brave wife who stayed to take care of everything. Just then, Robert appeared, pushed in his wheelchair by one of the employees. His right arm was bandaged. He looked at me with a complex expression, relief at seeing me safe, but also a certain guilt and avoidance. He didn't say anything, just nodded slightly and looked away. While the adults were caught up in that tense drama, Matthew slipped into the house. The boy must have been thirsty. A little later he came back and gently tugged on my sleeve. He whispered, just loud enough for only me to hear. Grandma, when I went to the kitchen for water, I heard Rose, the maid, talking to the cook. I leaned in to hear better. She told him, "It's a good thing the older lady wasn't there. Mrs. Candace warned us that if the police or anyone asked, we had to say we didn't know anything about moving the older lady's seat to the lawn. If anyone tells, they'll be fired immediately." I felt my heart tighten. A child wouldn't invent something like that. Candace had not only planned an accident, she was also using fear and her power to silence all witnesses who could betray her. I looked up and met her eyes. She was delicately wiping the drops of sweat from Robert's forehead with a handkerchief. She still looked like a docile, utterly dedicated wife. But now, in my eyes, her smile, her care, her tears, everything was nothing more than a repulsive mask hiding a diabolical soul. I know I can't act impulsively. My enemy is not only cruel, but also extremely cunning and well prepared. Confronting her head-on now would only make us lose. I turned to Thomas. We looked at each other. Without needing words, we both understood. The war is just beginning, and to win, we have to find evidence. Material, irrefutable evidence that unmasks her true face. That dinner was the most suffocating I have ever lived. Candace tried to pretend normalcy. She kept serving food to Robert, asking David about the approaching honeymoon, and recounting how the event organizing company had called her over and over to apologize. She played the role of the good hostess, trying to lift the family's spirits after a major blow. But the leaden silence from Thomas, Lucy, and me turned her efforts into a ridiculous monologue. The atmosphere at the table was so cold and tense it could be cut with a knife. I excused myself, citing tiredness and a headache, to retreat to my room early, leaving Candace with a forced smile on her face. An hour later, when I was sure everyone had gone to their rooms, I heard a soft tap on the door, like a cat's nails. It was Thomas and Lucy. I rushed to open it, brought them inside, and carefully locked the door. Under the lamp's dim light, the three of us sat together on the bed, our faces marked by determination. The real battle had begun. "We can't confront her directly," Thomas said immediately, his voice firm. "She has bribed and threatened all the employees. Our words against her tears. Who will believe us? We need material evidence, something she cannot deny." Lucy, with the quick mind and pragmatism of someone who works in the city, instantly proposed an idea. Large event companies like that usually have very strict safety regulations, especially in dangerous areas like fireworks. It's highly likely they installed surveillance cameras in the technical area to prevent incidents and as proof for the insurance company. We have to get access to them. Lucy's idea was like a flash of light in the darkness. At that moment, another memory came to my mind. "And the money," I said, my voice trembling slightly with excitement. "She surely bribed that technician with the ranch's money. The Los Robles bank account is in the name of my mother, Robert, and her. All large transfers require the electronic signature of at least 2 people." The plan was quickly drawn up. We would divide into 2 teams and act the next day. The next morning, Lucy said she had to go up to the city to resolve some urgent company matters and left very early. Candace didn't suspect a thing. She even instructed her sister-in-law to be careful on the road. In reality, Lucy went to see an old friend who is now a lawyer. Fortunately, that friend knew the director of the responsible event company. Lucy pretended to be a potential client, the director of a company looking for a partner to organize a large client appreciation event. She skillfully steered the conversation toward the unfortunate incident at Los Robles Ranch, showing deep concern about safety measures. The director, not wanting to lose an important client, did not hesitate to brag about their modern security system and unintentionally confirmed that they had 24-hour surveillance cameras in all technical areas. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lucy proposed allowing her lawyer, who was precisely that friend, to work with the technical department to extract the relevant video, under the argument of analyzing the crisis management process for legal purposes to request compensation from the insurance company for the damages to the ranch. Her reasoning was so sound and logical that the director had no reason to refuse. That same afternoon, Lucy returned. She looked tired, but her eyes shone in a strange way. Without a word, she opened her purse and showed a small black USB drive resting in the palm of her hand. A tiny object, but one that contained a terrifying truth. While Lucy was away, Thomas acted from home. He waited until Candace was busy at the fire scene, giving orders to the cleaning staff, and snuck into the ranch office, where the main computer holding all the data was located. "Mum," he told me before leaving, "I remember last week Candace gave me some documents and asked me to approve an online transfer order. She said it was an advance payment to a luxury flower supplier from the Netherlands to get the best price. I was in a hurry then, and I didn't think much of it. I just signed to finish quickly." Thomas logged into the ranch's bank account. After searching through hundreds of transactions, he finally found that order. The amount was $50,000, not a small sum for a flower order. But the recipient was no flower company. The name that appeared on the screen was John Charles Ramirez. Thomas immediately opened the event organization contract. His heart seemed to stop. That name exactly matched that of the head technician of the fireworks team. Without hesitation, Thomas printed the transaction receipt, circled the line of the fatal transfer with a red marker, and carefully put it away. That night, the 3 of us met again in my room. The door was not only locked, but also braced with a chair. All 3 hearts beat strongly. Thomas connected the USB drive to the laptop. After a few seconds, a blurry video appeared. The angle was from above, the image in black and white, grainy. But although the quality was not good, we immediately recognized Candace's figure in her emerald green dress. We clearly saw the decisive gesture of her hand, pointing toward the banquet area. And then, the crucial moment. The instant she handed a thick envelope to the technician, John Charles Ramirez, was completely recorded. Afterward, Thomas placed the bank receipt on the bed, next to the computer. 2 pieces of evidence, an image and a number. Silent, but with a weight shown capable of destroying a person. I looked at both pieces of evidence with trembling hands. Everything was too clear. It was no longer about assumptions, doubts, or emotions. It was the truth, cold and ruthless. I took a deep breath. I looked at my two children and said with a voice firmer than ever, "It's enough. Tomorrow we will go to the police station." The next morning, we told Candace that we needed to go to the courthouse to redo some property documents that might have been damaged in the fire. She suspected nothing and even asked us to be careful on the road. At the police station, we were taken to the chief inspector's office, a middle-aged man with a severe face. At first, he was skeptical of our story. He probably thought it was just a family dispute over assets. But when Thomas placed the laptop on the table and played the video, and when the bank receipt was placed beside it, his expression completely changed. He narrowed his eyes, looking at the screen, and then lowered his gaze to the numbers on the paper. Seriousness was reflected in every wrinkle of his face. He stood up, began to pace back and forth in the room, and then stopped, saying in a firm voice, "This is no longer an accident. This is premeditated attempted murder." Before leaving, I made a final request, one that came from the deepest part of a mother's heart. "Mr. Inspector, when her crimes are uncovered, please allow me to be present. I want to be the one to confront her." The chief inspector looked at me for a long time. His eyes hesitated at my last request. Finally, he nodded, but with one condition. Everything had to be done under his strict control, with no one acting outside the limits. I accepted. I didn't need violence, I just needed the truth. After talking with Thomas and Lucy, we decided to choose a moment and a place that no one could imagine. Sunday morning, right after Mass at the small town church. It was a sacred place where people went to cleanse their sins. I wanted Candace's crimes to be exposed before the eyes of God and the entire community, those who once admired and trusted her. Sins committed in the dark had to be judged in the light. That Sunday morning, the air felt dense, heavy. My entire family was present at the church, as was customary for generations. Candace was also there. She wore an elegant white dress, her hair neatly styled, immaculate, almost saintly. She knelt to pray, her hands clasped, her lips murmuring, so devout that it gave me chills. What was she asking forgiveness for? For the sins she had committed, or for divine help to hide them forever? I glanced back and noticed two unfamiliar men in plain clothes sitting quietly in the back row. Their eyes were not on the priest, but discreetly on us. They were the police. Everything was ready. Mass ended. The priest gave the final blessing. The organ played a soft melody. People began to stand up, say goodbye, and chat. My heart was pounding. It was the moment. I took a deep breath to gather all my courage and spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and firm enough to silence all noise in the church. Candace. The place froze. Everyone turned to look at us. Candace turned, confused, her eyes wide, not understanding anything. Robert, sitting next to her in his wheelchair, looked at me perplexed. I advanced slowly toward the front. I passed my pew and stood in front of my daughter-in-law. Thomas and Lucy followed me, standing behind me like two guardians. Only a few steps separated us. I looked her directly in the eyes and spoke with a calm voice, but one as sharp as a knife. "Before God and everyone present, I want you to answer truthfully one last time. Was the fire at the wedding really an accident?" Candace's face turned pale, but she continued playing her role. "Mum, why are you asking me that here? Of course it was an accident. The police already confirmed it." "And how do you explain this?" I interrupted her coldly. Just then, Thomas raised his phone, whose illuminated screen showed a video. The distorted sound and the blurry image of Candace handing money to a technician were audible. Although the quality was not good, no one could mistake her figure or the emerald green dress she was wearing. Some curious neighbors began to approach. Murmurs erupted like a swarm of bees. My God, is that Mrs. Candace? Who is she giving money to? Candace stammered, her lips trembling. No, it's not me. That video is fake. Someone wants to harm me. And what do you say about this transfer of $50,000? I pulled a 4-folded bank statement from my pocket and unfolded it before everyone. Did you pay the technician, John Charles Ramirez, for fine flowers, Candace? At that moment, the 2 plainclothes police officers advanced from the back, closing the aisle on both sides, blocking all exit. And then what I feared most happened. David, my grandson, the boy I loved the most in the world, who had remained motionless the whole time, suddenly reacted. His face turned wax white. He lunged toward me, snatched the bank statement from my hands, and then took the phone from his uncle. He stumbled, almost falling. His eyes read the numbers over and over again. Then they fixed on the image of his mother on the screen. He turned to Candace, his voice broken, full of pain and disbelief. Mom, tell me it's not true. Tell me it's all a misunderstanding. Why? Why did you do that on my wedding day? It was the final straw. Candace's perfect mask completely crumbled. She couldn't pretend anymore. She fell to her knees on the cold church floor. She covered her face with her hands and burst into heartbreaking sobs, a cry full of shame and despair. Forgive me, David, my son. Forgive me. I did everything for you, for your future. Future! David shouted through tears, his voice broken. The future cannot be built on crime. I don't want a future like that. He backed away step by step, moving away from his mother, who was crawling on the floor as if fleeing from a monster. Robert, sitting in his wheelchair, gripped the armrests so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His whole body trembled. He lowered his head. Those broad shoulders, which were once the support of the whole family, now shook. For the first time in many years, since the day of the accident, I saw my oldest son cry. Tears of helplessness, of shame, of a shattered heart. A police officer approached and coldly put handcuffs on Candace. The metallic sound of the handcuffs echoed dryly, cruelly in the silence of the church. Mrs. Candace Fuentes, the officer said firmly, you are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder and premeditated arson. As they led her out, Candace passed by me. She lifted her swollen, tear-filled eyes and whispered between sobs, I was wrong, Mum. Forgive me. I looked away without answering. Forgiveness is not a gift that can be given easily, especially when the price of the sin is the destruction of an entire family. Candace's silhouette disappeared behind the heavy wooden doors of the church. Inside, only we remained, my broken and shattered family, standing among the empty pews and the judging silence of the temple. That night, after the most violent storm passed, Los Robles Ranch fell into a heavy, terrifying silence. There was no longer any laughter or voices of celebration, nor the suffocating tension of the days of confrontation. Only emptiness remained, only the wind whistling through the broken windows like a sad lament, and the insects singing outside in the field, an eternal sound, indifferent to human tragedies. The big house had never been so cold and lonely. David and his new wife packed their bags and left that same afternoon. They couldn't stay in a place that had witnessed the collapse of the mother he so revered. Before leaving, my grandson hugged me tightly. His broad back trembled in my thin arms. He cried, and his warm tears soaked my shoulder. Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about my mother. I could only stroke his back, my heart broken into pieces. I knew that wound would stay with him all his life. As for Robert, my oldest son, he locked himself in his room as soon as we returned from the church. I knocked on the door several times, but he didn't answer. Only once did I hear the sound of a glass shattering against the wall and breaking. And then, absolute silence. A silence more terrifying than any scream. I couldn't sleep. Sleep had abandoned me. I lit an oil lamp, one of those antique ones my husband liked to use, and walked alone down the dark hallway. The trembling, weak light illuminated the family photos hung on the wall, making the smiles in the images look like distorted masks. I stopped in front of Robert and Candace's wedding photo. They looked so radiant and happy in that picture. Candace had a pure smile. Her black eyes looked at her husband with love and admiration. I used to think that was true love. I wondered at what moment greed and jealousy infiltrated that young woman's soul. Since when did that pure smile turn into a weapon, and that loving gaze become stained with deadly calculations? I went out onto the porch, where only empty chairs and the remains of a party that would never end remained. The night wind was icy. It crept through my coat and made me shiver. "Mum, you should come inside. The night mist is cold." Thomas had come out behind me without my noticing. He placed a thick wool scarf over my shoulders. He didn't say anything else. He just stood by my side, looking with me into the darkness that covered the fields. After a while, Thomas broke the silence. "Mum, I talked to the lawyer. The evidence is too clear. It will be difficult for her to escape guilt." He hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words, and then continued in a worried voice. "Mum, this place is now full of painful memories. Every corner brings sad things. Maybe you and Robert could sell the ranch and come live with us in the city. We could start over, somewhere else." I looked at him. I knew he was saying it out of love, that he was worried about me and his brother. The idea of leaving, of selling everything to flee the past, had also crossed my mind. To leave to forget the betrayal, the pain, the ruin. But I looked into the distance, at the cornfields, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. I listened to the soft lowing of the cattle in the stable, the whisper of the wind through the familiar trees. This was not just land and a house. It was the soul of my family, the legacy that generations built with sweat, tears, and blood. Abandoning it would be killing it, ripping out our roots with my own hands. I shook my head. I placed my calloused hand over my son's. My voice was firm. "No, Thomas, I won't leave. The sin happened on this land, but this land is not guilty. Our ancestors lived and died here. I cannot be the one to end everything." I looked him directly in the eyes. "I will stay. To take care of Robert, he needs it more than ever. To keep the flame of the Robles alive. And to pray for all of us." Thomas looked at me with eyes full of tears. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to convince me. He just nodded and hugged me tightly. In that embrace, I knew he had understood his mother's decision. After talking with Thomas, I felt I had more courage. I went to the kitchen. I prepared a pot of hot ginger tea with my own hands. I put it on a tray and carried it to Robert's room door. I knocked again, this time more gently. "Robert, it's Mum. Will you let me in? I brought you ginger tea." Inside, everything was silent for a long time. I thought he wouldn't answer me, but then I heard the sound of the bolt moving heavily. The door opened slightly. Robert was in his wheelchair, in the middle of the messy room, with the pieces of the glass still scattered on the floor. His eyes were red and swollen. In a single day, my son seemed to have aged 10 years. He didn't look at me. He just lowered his head and mumbled in a hoarse voice. "Forgive me, Mum. I already knew. I've felt it for a long time, but I didn't do anything. I'm a coward." I left the tea tray on the nearby table, went in, and knelt beside the wheelchair. I hugged my son's immobile legs, the same ones that once traversed this ranch from end to end. I told him, my voice choked with tears. "It wasn't your fault, Robert. You were also a victim of greed and lies. It's all over now. We are going to get through this together, okay, son?" Hearing me, Robert finally couldn't hold back anymore. He burst into sobs, a broken cry, like that of an injured child. He rested his head on my shoulder. We stayed like that, hugging, crying in that silent room, letting the tears wash away the pain, the guilt, and the shame. It was the longest night at Los Robles. But among those tears, emails, and that silence, I felt that something new, fragile but sincere, was beginning to emerge among those of us who remained in the family. We had lost too much, but we still had each other. Dawn would come, bringing with it the ashes of the past and the hope of the future, and we would have to face it together, right here. Months passed. Time, like a silent river, began to soften the open wounds, leaving scars that, although they would never fully heal, no longer hurt so much. Life at Los Robles took on a new, calmer, and slower order. Loud laughter became rare, replaced by soft smiles and looks of understanding. We were learning to live among the wreckage. Candace was sentenced to many years in prison for attempted murder and intentional arson. On the day of the trial, none of us were present. We didn't want to see more judgments or stir up the pain. We chose to let the past rest, although we knew it would never completely disappear. Thomas and Lucy brought Matthew almost every weekend. The boys' clear laughter was like fresh water falling on our dry earth. Robert started coming out of his room more. He no longer locked himself in the darkness. Now he spent most of his time in the office, focused on reviewing account books, inventories, and properties. Work that he had neglected for years, entrusting it completely to his ex-wife. It seemed that regaining control of the numbers helped him regain some of his self-worth. David sometimes called to ask about me and his father. His voice sounded firmer and more mature. He and his wife had moved to another city to start a new life, away from the gossip and curious glances. I know the wound in his heart is still there, deep, but he is trying to move forward like all of us. One weekend afternoon, as the sunset shed the last golden rays over the ranch, Matthew and I were sitting on the doorstep, shucking the freshly harvested corn cobs. We both worked in silence, with only the dry sound of the corn and the birds singing in the garden. Suddenly, from the distant town, popping sounds began to be heard. Some party was being celebrated, and the first fireworks bloomed in the purplish blue sky. "Look, Grandma, fireworks! How pretty!" Matthew shouted, excited, leaving the half-shucked corn cob. The boy pointed to the sky, and his dark eyes shone, reflecting the multicolored fireflowers. I followed his gaze. I felt a slight pang in my chest, an involuntary reflex impossible to control. My throat dried up, and the image of that infernal fire threatened to return. But then I saw Matthew's enthusiastic and innocent face. I couldn't allow my fear to stain his purity. I tried to smile, a smile that perhaps came out a little crooked, and ran my hand through his hair. "Yes, very pretty, sweetheart." The fireflowers continued to burst, one after another, painting bright pictures in the sky. Matthew kept looking fascinated. Suddenly he turned to me. His transparent eyes looked at me fixedly, and he asked me a question that left me frozen. Grandma, why did Mrs. Candace do that? Dad Thomas says she did something very bad. I remained silent for a long time. The air around us seemed still. Only the distant popping sounds of the fireworks could be heard. How could I explain to a child the greed, the envy, and the complicated shadows of the human soul? I didn't want to sow hatred in his heart, but I couldn't lie either. Finally, I looked at the fireflowers slowly fading in the sky and spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. Because, my love, in this world, there are people who believe that to have their own bright light, they must put out the candle of others. I paused, looking into his attentive little eyes. They don't understand something very simple. When we all light our candles, the room becomes much brighter. Matthew tilted his little head, reflecting on my words for a moment. Then he rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, with the purest and most absolute sincerity, "I like it when the room is brighter." I smiled, this time genuinely. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the innocent scent of his hair. The fireworks continued to illuminate the sky, bathing both our faces in light. I realized that light was still beautiful, dazzling, worthy of admiration. But since that fateful night, its meaning for me had changed forever. It was no longer just a symbol of joy, of party, and of union. Now it was an eternal reminder of the darkness that can hide even in the brightest places. It was the painful awakening that my family paid for at a price too high. I whispered to myself, and to the souls resting in the robles, as the last flashes faded into the night, restoring calm to the sky. The light is still beautiful, but I will never see it the same way again. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We tell this not to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and pause to reflect. I sincerely wonder how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.